So I want to welcome everybody for being here and joining us for another segment of our Big Vision Recovery Culture series. Today, we're welcoming Congressman Ritchie Torres of the Bronx to speak with us about the topic of mental illness and how we can find ways to break the silence, stigma, and the shame that too often surround mental illness. Congressman Ritchie Torres is a fighter. We say a fighter, but you're not really a fighter like a boxer, but like a fighter from the Bronx who has spent his entire life working for the community he calls home. Like many in the South Bronx, poverty and struggle have never been abstractions to him. At 25, Ritchie became New York City's youngest elected official and the first openly LGBTQ person elected in the Bronx. He represents New York's 15th Congressional District and is a member of the Financial Services Committee and serves as vice chair of the Homeland Security Committee. But most importantly, he has a very inspiring story to tell. My name is Goldberg, and I am the founder of Big Vision Community. We are a not-for-profit organization that provides free experiences to sober young people. We help them discover new passions and skills and reconnect with a peer community with no judgments and no triggers. We are the solution for sober young adults that want to sustain their recovery, showing them that their social life isn't over. We say life isn't over when you get sober, and show them that sobriety can be exciting and fun. We're the missing link in recovery. So a little about my story. So I lost my son Isaac to an unintentional overdose at the young age of 23. He was an amazing young man, but he struggled with mental health issues from when he was a young boy. It started out with learning issues, OCD, irrational fears, anxiety, depression, and he always felt such shame in having these issues and in feeling different from everybody else. It led him down a path of addiction, and although he tried very hard to overcome his issues, sadly, he was one who didn't make it. And at the time, there was so little discussion about mental health or addiction. This was 8 years ago. But today, there's a lot more conversation. And I believe that we are starting to erase the stigma a little bit. We just heard about Naomi Judd, who passed away, died by suicide after years of struggling with her mental health. And as sad as that was, I was at least happy to see that her daughters were very open about it and, spoke about her struggles and spoke about the fact that she took her own life. It's a horrible thing, but it needs to be out in the open. So I just want to thank you for being here today. And when we met the first time, you were very open about your struggles and your past. And I felt like an instant connection. And I came over to you and I said, you would be such an inspiration to our community. And I would love it if you would join us and speak. And so I thank you for being here. And I know you're very busy. And I thank you for taking the time to be here with us. So I'm going to just open it up with a question about this destigmatization of mental health issues. We know it's very critical. What do you think needs to be done to overcome the stigma?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for your commitment to advancing the cause of mental health. I feel like there's nothing more humanizing and universalizing than the subject of mental health, because we all either have had mental health challenges in our lives or we know someone who has had those challenges. So it's one of the few issues, one of the few lived experiences that can bring people together. I have long struggled with depression. I take an antidepressant every day, and I feel no shame in admitting it. And I feel like as a public figure, I have an obligation to tell my story in the hopes of breaking the silence and shame and stigma that often surrounds the subject of mental health. And if I can inspire people to see a way forward, then I would consider that a public service. About 15 years ago, I was at the lowest point in my life. I had dropped out of college. I found myself struggling with depression. I lost my best friend to a fatal opioid overdose. And there were moments when I thought of taking my own life because I felt as if the whole world around me had crumbled. I felt like nothing in my life seemed to be going right. And so I never imagined 7 years later, I would become the youngest elected official in the largest city in America. And then I would become a United States Congressman. So the lesson learned from my own life is even in your moment of greatest depression and despair, never lose hope. There is a way forward, and my life is living proof.
That's amazing. Can you just describe some of the ways that you were able to, I mean, aside from medication, obviously, which always helps, but some of the other ways that you were able to overcome some of these challenges? I mean, you got to where you are, but like how? What brought you there? Was it people around you? Was it, what inspired you to change your life?
Look, none of us succeed on the strength of our own merits alone. We are only as strong as the support structure in our life. And I had a strong support system. I had a mother who made enormous sacrifices for me. But I would not be alive were it not for psychiatry, psychotherapy, and medication. When I sought treatment, particularly in the form of psychotherapy and medication, it changed the trajectory of my life. It set my life on a new path. Because before then, I felt like a broken man and I could not function in the workplace, in school. I felt paralyzed. I was languishing in depression. And it was the combination of medication and psychotherapy that enabled me to reinvent myself, to renew myself.
And I imagine having a mother who cared about you so much and a strong family was pretty important also.
It's important to have people who are patient with you. And I had mentors and a mother who believed in me more than I believed in myself, who never lost confidence in me, who had the view, this too shall pass. This is simply a detour on the path to rebuilding yourself. And because if my community had lost confidence in me, then I never would have recovered. I had people who were willing to allow me to stumble because they knew that what I was experiencing. And it's important, that support is important, because when you're struggling with depression without fully understanding depression as a mental illness, you can easily entangle yourself in a cycle of self-doubt and self-blame. You can easily mistake your depression for a failure of willpower or a failure of character, which will only deepen your mental illness.
Right.
And it's important to have a supportive community around you.
Yes, it's very important, which is really why I founded Big Vision, because one of the things that Isaac, although he did have, I like to think that he had me as as his biggest, supporter and, cheerleader. In his case, it wasn't enough, because he, always went back to his old friends and his old ways. He didn't have this, peer community of people who understood him and just accepted him and didn't just accept him for what they couldn't accept him for who he was, because he wouldn't tell them. It was very hard for him to be honest about it. So, when obviously mental health is not visible, I always feel like that's the greatest challenge. If you have a physical disability, people see it and they understand it. But how do you get people to understand what's going on in here?
You cannot allow yourself to bear the burden of mental illness or trauma without speaking about it, without confronting it. My grandmother lost her own mother at age 11. Her own mother was murdered. And even though I never met my great-grandmother, I saw the trauma that my grandmother carried throughout her whole life, and she never spoke about it. She never sought treatment about it. She just simply internalized it. And no one should have to live that way.
Right.
No one should have to live their whole lives with that level of trauma untreated and
Right.
unspoken.
I hear that. So how do you feel like recovering from these mental health challenges? How do you feel like, do you feel like that made you into a better person? Do you feel like, how do you feel like that changed you, being that person who had to overcome so much?
Well, I want to be careful not to romanticize the experience of mental illness, because it's something that I would never want to experience, the depths of depression that I had to go through during my early college years. But Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "That which does not kill you makes you stronger."
Mm.
And we all can be made better and stronger and wiser by the struggles in our lives and by the lessons learned from those struggles. And I feel that my experience with depression and my openness about depression has given me an ethic of radical authenticity. I'm willing to be open and honest and transparent about the struggles that I face in my own life. And one of the reasons I felt like I won my own election is when people are increasingly gravitating toward authenticity. People want to see themselves represented in their elected officials. People want to see their lived experiences represented in their elected officials. So I would say my experience has taught me how to be more authentic, more open with the world.
Well, I have to say that for someone who, has been, I was a mother to someone who really struggled, and I, work, a lot of people in our community struggle on a daily basis. It's really important, and I really appreciate the fact that you are so open about it, because it does make people feel better about themselves. Because people always, obviously with Instagram these days, with social media, everybody's lives look perfect. Nobody's posting on there feeling depressed today. It's like, it's a great day. Everything looks great on social media. So when someone comes out and talks about it so openly, I think it's a big deal, and it's very, very much you're not just doing it for you, you're doing it for many, many people out there.
And I feel like the mental health challenges have never been more profound. We have a generation of young people who are growing up on social media for the first time, who are under immense social and cultural pressure to create a persona, an idealized persona. And then you have young people who had to live through the social isolation of COVID-19. So the combination of COVID-19 and social media could have a profound impact on the next generation. We're beginning to see historic rates of depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation and suicide among young people in our society because of the perfect storm that has taken hold.
It's very scary. I mean, isolation, the beginning of COVID for us and for our community was very scary, because we just lost people. We just didn't know where they were, and they were just, everybody was isolated, and that is the worst possible thing, not being part of a community, not having people around you. So it's been very tough. But you even look at like somebody like Naomi Judd, who, on the outside seemed like, she's got it all going on. She's, won awards, and she's had a successful career and everything. And it's like, it's hard to fathom, but then you think about it and it's like, she's just like anybody else. It's not about all the outer trappings and all the success.
I tell people you should never envy anyone. You should never judge them from afar. No life is as glamorous as it might seem on the surface. And you never know the pain and the trauma that's hidden from public view.
100%. We see that a lot. What would your best advice be for a young adult today who is struggling with these mental health challenges, just like you discussed, this social media generation? What would you advise them? What would you say?
I would tell them to never give in and to never give up, and take the long view, that there is a way forward. that it is possible to overcome whatever challenges you might be facing at a given moment. I think it's important that people have confidence in themselves and have a supportive community around them that enables them to become the best version of themselves, and never feel ashamed. I think I once heard a person make the following observation, that you are no more at fault for your mental illness as a diabetic is at fault for the inability to generate insulin, right? There's no reason at all to blame yourself for mental illness at all.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. I find that, people who struggle with mental illness sort of want to, push it aside and just not pretend that it doesn't exist, but don't want to talk about it because it's almost, there's still such a stigma. I think the more celebrities that come out talking about, going to treatment for whether it's depression, anxiety, addiction, or whatever it is. When Isaac was struggling, you didn't really see that. It was 8 years ago. I don't know if you realize it was a different time, that people would just not, there was nobody like you coming out and really, that I knew of, speaking about their issues, their struggles with their mental health. So I think it's so helpful to, the more that's written about it and the more that it's talked about, I think it really gives people strength. I think that's a really, really important factor. And I understand what you're saying about never giving up, but I think what you said before about having a strong community around you, whether it's your family or friends, whatever it is really essential, but not always so easy to find that. Not everybody has that.
It can be hard to come by, and when I made it to Congress, the greatest emotion I felt was gratitude. I was grateful for the family and friends and mentors who believed in me and who enabled me to realize a personal dream. You're right, not everyone has the benefit of mentors, not everyone has the benefit of a stable home or a stable family. But we need a support structure. We all need it.
Oh, absolutely.
We can succeed on our own.
Right. So did you always aspire to be in politics, to do this work that you're doing? Is that something you always wanted to do as a kid?
No, actually, I either thought, my aunt would tell me, you speak so much, you should become a lawyer. So I thought I would either become a teacher or a lawyer. And instead of becoming a lawyer, I became a lawmaker. But I got my start in politics as a housing organizer. And then at age 24, I was encouraged by tenant leaders to consider running for public office. I was a young housing organizer. I had no deep pockets, ties to the party machine. And I was an introvert. And I felt like I was ill-suited to run for public office. And I remember I was so anxious about speaking in public that I would drink a glass of wine before every speech in order to calm my nerves. But I came to realize that, in a council district, there might be 160,000 residents, but only 6,000 people vote. Some of these districts in the Bronx have some of the lowest rates of voter participation. And so I spent a whole year doing nothing but knocking on doors. And I went into people's homes and I heard their stories, and I forged a much deeper connection with people than even I thought was possible. And I won my first campaign on the strength of door-to-door, face-to-face campaigning. I became the youngest elected official in New York City.
Wow. It's impressive. I'm sure people related to you when you went and knocked on their door. That's a big deal. If I had someone, a politician or somebody come knock on my door like that, I'd be pretty thrilled about that.
I had people tell me in the 40 years I've been living in the Bronx, I've never had a candidate for public office knock on my door. And there are people whom I will meet in the streets who will tell me, you knocked on my door 8 years ago.
Wow.
It's just, nothing is more powerful than face-to-face, person-to-person interaction. And it pertains to our issue, the issue of people want to know, people want to feel like they're being seen and heard.
Yeah.
People want to know that their elected officials value them enough, value them. And what can be a greater sign of valuing your constituents than to knock on their doors, than to go to their homes, than to see their humanity face to face. It's a powerful form of interaction. It's the most powerful form of voter contact.
I hear that. I know we talk about, they say that the opposite of addiction is connection. And connection is really what, at Big Vision, this is what we are all about, creating a community, people being able to connect with other people who are going through the same thing that they're going through, and that they possibly wouldn't meet otherwise, because on the outside, you would never know by looking at somebody what they're going through. And they all come together, and even though they don't have to share their life stories, because we are non-clinical, it's not therapy, they can just, talk to each other and just feel normal and know that they're not going to be judged. And I think that's a huge thing, not being judged. And I think it's a huge problem in society today, is that we're always judging people, like you said, it's either, it could be for negative or for positive. We look at people and we're like, oh my God, she's got everything, and then you hear some horrible story the next day, with Naomi Judd, which just, tragic. So I think that community and connection are key for anybody who's struggling with a mental illness.
Or even if you have no mental, I feel like
that's true.
all of us have varying degrees of mental illness. There's no one who's perfectly free of mental illness, in my view.
100%.
We all need community and connection. It's a profound human belonging. What people often explain the phenomenon of gang violence.
Yeah.
People join gangs out of a need for belonging. Right? If you have no stable home, if you have no community center, then you derive your sense of belonging from gang membership.
Interesting.
There's a psychological dimension to a whole host of the problems affecting our society, from violence to chronic incarceration to chronic homelessness to chronic substance abuse. Mental health pervades everything.
Right. I think this is May is actually Mental Health Awareness Month. And, it's kind of like Mother's Day or something like that, where you say, well, every day should be Mother's Day. Every day we should be aware of our mental health. We shouldn't need a special month to think about it. Although every month is has a name these days, every week, every day, we're doing that. But it's just that's something that we all struggle with. It. You're right. In some way, shape, or form, every one of us has something up here, which is not I don't want to say normal, but you know what I mean? That's different.
I am, as a public servant, I'm in a position to advocate for those who have the same struggles that I had to face in my own life. And I began struggling with depression in high school, and I had no conception of mental illness at the time, so I was blaming myself. And I often ask myself, what if I had had a psychotherapist or a psychologist or a social worker in high school? My life could have played out very differently. All the crises that followed could have been prevented. And so one of the things that I've done so far as an elected official is we've secured funding for school-based health centers in the Bronx. Schools are a natural place to serve as a hub of healthcare services. It can be a place where you can see your dentist and your psychotherapist and your primary care physician. And so we've been investing heavily in school-based health centers.
That's great.
My own experience, that when you have no support, it can have consequences that can haunt you for a long time.
Right. Well, that's fantastic. Great work on your part, and thank you for everything that you do. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your being open about this topic. And I hope that we're actually going to be opening a community center. Big Vision is we're going to have our own space we haven't really had up until now. It's going to take a little time, probably be ready in about a year. And it's going to be a safe place for people to come and hang out and do activities, everything substance free and free, because our events are all free. And I'm going to invite you to come to the opening, and I hope you will come and really, see us. Well, you can come anytime to any of our events and just see us in action and see what our community is all about. And I thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, just thank you for doing the most important work, which is the work of saving lives. So,
Thank you.
forward to working with you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.